Yesterday I spent the day milling some wood to rough dimensions, getting ready for a project that I'm about to start. Today I'm going to start cutting some of the pieces to their final finished sizes. I'm going to be using the table saw and the miter saw. But before I make those critical cuts, I want to make sure both saws are cutting accurately. And to do that, I'm just going to use one piece of wood. Quick and easy, I'll show you how to do it. But before we start, we need one little geometry lesson. But it won't be hard. Come on. I've got a little paper cutter over here, and I took a straight piece of wood. Using some double-sided tape, I put it down here as a fence, and it's off square just a little bit. Probably couldn't even tell by looking. If I push this piece of paper up to that piece of wood and cut it, and then take those two pieces of paper and line them up against the straight edge. That looks like a pretty straight cut. But now watch. If I take one of these and turn it end for end. And again, push them up flush to this piece of paper. And see what happens? Pieces of paper are touching down here, and there's quite a gap up here. That's because by reversing one of these, we've doubled the angle of error and made it visible. And that's the principle we're going to use with our one board trick for checking both the table saw and the miter saw. Now normally when I do this, I use a scrap of 3/4 inch plywood. This happens to be a piece of 3/4 inch particle board that's been covered with some kind of laminate on both sides. It's actually one of those prefab shelves that you can buy in the hardware store, but I thought the white might make it easier to see for this demonstration. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this little curved cove decorative edge here, and then we're going to square this board up. Okay, so this is the edge that I just cut. Now I want to turn the board 90 degrees and just trim off this next edge here. So now I've got two smooth sides. Now I can cut this to a perfect square by turning the board 90 degrees again and making two more cuts. Now, assuming all that went well, I've got a perfectly square board, but let's take a look at that first. Okay, we've got our board that we've cut square on the table saw, we hope, and now what we need is a dead flat surface that we can check things on. Now, you may want to use the top of your table saw because it's probably quite flat. I'm going to use this bench. I've got this big heavy straight edge, and I've double checked it, and I know this is dead flat here, and it's going to be a little easier to see. And I put up a piece of walnut here just to give us some contrast behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand this board on edge, and then I'm going to take a square. You could use a combination square as well. And I'm going to bring that up to the edge of that board and see if we see any daylight. And I don't see any daylight in there, so that means that this edge and the bottom are at perfect 90-degree angles and square. And that's good because that means my fence is lined up straight. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this edge lightly over here, and that's going to be the edge that's going to go against the fence. And I'm going to take and cut this board in half. Okay, we don't have to get real exact here. Just want to get close to in the middle and basically cut us a nice chunk of wood to use for the next phase of our test. And we're going to use this piece that we ran against the fence. It's got the little arrow right here for the next phase of our test. Okay, so now we've got our piece of wood here, and there's the little arrow that was up against the table saw fence. And I'm going to push that back towards the fence on the miter saw, and I'm going to add 2 more arrows here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this approximately in half. Okay, so let's now take these 2 pieces back over to the workbench where we know it's flat and true, and let's check and see how this saw did. So now with our 2 pieces of wood that were cut on the miter saw, with the direction orientation here as they were cut next to the fence, we can check the miter saw for accuracy. Now, of course, if I stand these up in the orientation they were in when they were cut, just like the paper on the paper cutter, that cut looks pretty straight. So what I want to do is I want to flip one of these boards over end to end for end, to exacerbate any error that might be there and push them together. But I will tell you, it looks like my miter saw is cutting pretty square. So there is one additional check that we get out of this board, and that's to look at the cut edge to see if it's vertical this direction. Now obviously when I put it in the same orientation it was in, looks pretty good. So once again, turn the board over end for end and take a look, and the fact is I've got a tiny little gap down there at the bottom. So what I want to do is I want to look at the verticalness, if that's a word, of the blade and make sure that I have it vertical or 90 degrees relative to the tabletop. This direction, it seems to be just fine, but this way, need to make a small adjustment. So there it is, a good way to check the alignment of your fence and your blade on both your table saw and your miter saw in 5 minutes or so with 1 piece of scrap wood. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks for watching.